So if you're anything like me, you've probably wondered how a missile is able to track a target that's moving about the speed of sound. Or maybe they're moving just really fast, like 707 meters per second, which isn't too fast for a fighter jet, but let's just assume that anyways. And you're probably wondering how a missile that is literally like this big compared to a fighter jet is able to hit it with such precision. And we can infer that these the targeting or positioning system of the missile is used by, or at least Fox 3 missiles in this example, is using radar guidance. And radar guidance is a very special uh, way for a missile to lock on or locate any targets in a locking radius. And I'll be explaining it in this video in simple terms at least, or at least terms that I understand. So first we need to understand how radio works in the first place for us to know how the radar guided missiles work. So let's say you have your missile, and it's this little box here. The missile, or at least plane, emits a radar signal which bounces back from the target. And depending on how the radar wave bounces back, the missile is able to take that signal and communicate it to the missile or plane. And the time that it takes to bounce back can also determine how far or close the object is to the missile. So, throughout this entire exchange, the two objects are reflecting radar waves. And while they reflect the radar waves, the more farther it is, or at least the more time it takes, the farther it is the plane or missile is from the target. If the object's moving, the radar can also measure its speed by analyzing the Doppler shift, which is essentially a change in frequency on the waves based on how fast or slow the object is moving towards or away from the radar. And the plane is able to process these radar waves into data used in the missile. So a radar missile is able to utilize the data from the radio waves, like speed, maybe the size of the object, and maybe the location, based off of the time it takes for the radar waves. So we can infer these from the radar wave. Sorry, that was a bad W. From the radar wave. So an active or passive or so a passive radar missile is able to use its own radar wave to constantly ping an object or the target in this example and constantly send back information to the missile. And as it actively receives these data, it can adjust in real time for the object, whether it moves up, down, right, left, or in any space in a 3D environment. And because of this, the missile is able to adjust the fins or thrust from itself to adjust to attack target. As previously mentioned, the radar waves can constantly be pinging back and forth, so the radar is able to communicate how far the target is in real time. And recent or more modern missiles are able to ping radar waves a lot faster than something from the 1990s, which is when passive radar missiles were introduced in the F-14 Tomcat with the Phoenix missiles, or that's at least the most common variant of it. Once the missile is locked on, it steers using the radar data, and once it gets close enough, it makes a bunch of final adjustments to calculate the best place for impact on the target. And radar missiles are so accurate because they constantly are updating the target's position in real time, and that makes them a lot harder for pilots to dodge them because they aren't really affected by flares, which heat radars, or at least heat guided missiles, are vulnerable to because the heat signature of the flares are higher than the planes. In this case, we're able to identify the radar wave from the flares differing from the actual aircraft, So countermeasures aren't really much of a problem for radar-based missiles. However, there are recent technologies that are able to jam the missile's radar. So imagine if that was a wave and you get a bunch of these little like interferences, and that's radar jamming. Recent technologies are able to jam missiles mid-air, believe it or not, and effectively make it a lot harder for the missile to determine uh, like the waves between the target and itself. There are certain because the radar waves need to bounce off of an aircraft in a certain angle or at least a certain way. Uh, Radar notching or missile notching is a common way of uh, attacking or defending against a missile, but that's a later story. You can also use the radar waves to tell why stealth aircraft are so effective at their job, because they utilize specific designs in their aircraft to minimize the radar bounces. So in my drawing here, I visualize a big radar wave and then it bounces off uh, a very accurately portrayed stealth aircraft with smaller waves. And it would usually it would appear as a bigger object, but on a radar that is detecting a stealth plane, it would appear as a smaller object. And this is both good and bad for missiles because some missiles require or adjust to aircrafts that are moving at a certain speed and size, but they won't be able to adjust for the smaller area or size of a small or large aircraft or stealth aircraft, despite it being actually large. And that's kind of the basics of radar-based missiles. Um, a lot of this stuff is like way out of my definition, but I wanted to try explaining it in a way that people who want to get into the basics of radar-based missiles or guidance systems in general can comprehend it at a high school level. And this can also come in helpful when I guess you're playing War Thunder, because they kind of use the same principle with the RWR. And the RWR can sense radar waves a lot more effectively than, say, a missile or a plane, which is why it's so effective. Otherwise, I hope this video helped you out in some sort of way, and I'll catch you later.